The gunshot echoed across the Montana plains, sending a flock of startled birds into the crimson sky as Katherine, Kit Daniels, ducked lower in her saddle. Her mare, a dappled gray Mustang named Whisper, sensed her rider's tension and quickened her pace, hooves drumming a desperate rhythm against the parched earth. Kit glanced over her shoulder, her chestnut hair escaping from beneath her wide-brimmed hat, terror rising in her throat as she spotted 3 riders cresting the hill behind her. "Come on, girl," Kit whispered, leaning forward and feeling the sting of a fresh bullet graze on her arm. Just a little farther. It was 1878, and Helena, Montana Territory, was still 2 days' hard ride away if she could outrun the men hunting her with a $500 bounty on her head. Dead or alive, the poster had said, though Kit knew which option Thaddeus Blackwell preferred after what she'd done. As darkness approached, the vast emptiness of the landscape offered little sanctuary. Kit's vision blurred with exhaustion as she searched for any place to hide. Whisper was flagging, foam flecking her dark muzzle, sides heaving with exertion. They couldn't keep this pace much longer. The sound of a creek drew Kit's attention, and she guided Whisper toward the water, desperate for a moment's respite. The rushing stream cut through rocky terrain, leading toward a copse of cottonwoods. Kit dismounted awkwardly, her legs nearly buckling beneath her as she led Whisper to drink. "We can't stop long," she murmured, stroking the mare's neck while scanning the horizon. The bounty hunters would be following her tracks, and nightfall would only delay the inevitable. Kit splashed water on her face, wincing as it stung the small cut on her cheekbone, a souvenir from her hasty escape from Virginia City. The snap of a twig behind her made Kit whirl around, her hand flying to the small revolver at her waist. A tall figure emerged from the shadows and her heart hammered against her ribs. "Easy there, madam," came a deep voice, its tone surprisingly gentle. "I mean you no harm." The stranger stepped into the fading light, hands raised slightly. He wore a weathered Stetson pulled low over keen blue eyes, a dark bandana around his neck, and trail-worn clothes that spoke of long days in the saddle. A Winchester rifle was slung across his back, and a Colt revolver rested in a holster on his hip. "Who are you?" Kit demanded, her revolver still aimed at his chest. "Name's Thomas Dawson," he replied, not moving any closer. "Most folks call me Tucker." His gaze shifted to the horizon where dust clouds marked her pursuer's approach. "Seems to me you're in a heap of trouble." Kit's hand trembled slightly. "That's none of your concern, mister." Tucker Dawson's expression remained impassive as he assessed her situation with unsettling accuracy. 3 riders coming fast, bounty hunters, I'd wager, considering how determined they look. He nodded toward her mare. "Your horse is done in. You keep pushing her, she'll collapse within the hour." "What choice do I have?" Kit hissed, desperation edging into her voice. Tucker's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I might have an idea if you're willing to trust a stranger." Kit hesitated, weighing her options. The bounty hunters were closing in, and Whisper was indeed exhausted. Whatever this man was proposing couldn't be worse than falling into Blackwell's men's hands. "What's your plan?" she asked cautiously. Tucker moved to his own horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding grazing nearby that Kit hadn't noticed before. "First, we need to make your trail disappear." He pulled a leafy branch from his saddlebag. "Lead your mare into the creek and follow it downstream about 50 yards. I'll come behind and erase your tracks." Kit frowned. "Why would you help me?" Tucker's mouth quirked slightly. "Let's just say I've got no love for bounty hunters, or men who chase women across the territory." He gestured toward the approaching riders. "We need to move now if this is going to work." Against her better judgment, Kit nodded and led Whisper into the shallow creek. The cool water soothed the mare's legs as they splashed downstream, staying close to an overhanging bank. Behind them, Tucker Dawson methodically swept away any sign of their passage from the creek bank, his movements efficient and practiced. After following the creek for some distance, Tucker guided them to a rocky outcropping where they could leave the water without leaving tracks. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land. "There's a place about 3 miles from here," Tucker said quietly as he helped Kit remount. "Old trapper's cabin I use sometimes. We can rest your horse and figure out what to do come morning." They rode in silence, Tucker leading the way through increasingly rough terrain. Twice he stopped to listen, his posture tense, but each time he relaxed and continued on. Kit realized he was deliberately choosing a path that would be difficult to follow over stone, through dense brush, avoiding anywhere their horses might leave clear tracks. When they finally reached the cabin, it was full dark. The structure was small but solid, tucked into a stand of pines that concealed it from casual observation. Tucker dismounted fluidly and moved to help Kit, but she slid from the saddle on her own, unwilling to show further weakness. "There's a lean-to around back for the horses," Tucker said, gathering the reins. "Go on inside. There's a lantern by the door." Kit hesitated, then pushed open the cabin door, finding it exactly as he described. The interior was simple but clean: a small table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, a narrow bed against one wall, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. She lit the lantern with shaking hands, then sank onto one of the chairs, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. Tucker returned a few minutes later, carrying his saddlebags and rifle. "Horses are settled," he said, setting his gear down. "Yours needed the rest badly." He studied her face in the lantern light. "You're hurt." Kit touched her cheek self-consciously. "It's nothing. And your arm?" He nodded toward the tear in her sleeve, darkened with blood. "Just a graze." Tucker moved to a shelf and retrieved a small wooden box. "Let me take a look. Wounds out here turn bad quick if not tended." Too tired to argue, Kit allowed him to clean the bullet graze on her arm with whiskey from a flask, wincing at the sting. His hands were rough but gentle, and he worked with quiet efficiency. "You've done this before," Kit observed. "Spent 4 years patching up soldiers during the war," Tucker replied, wrapping a clean strip of cloth around her arm. "Field medicine ain't pretty, but it gets the job done." When he finished, he moved away immediately, respecting her space. He busied himself building a small fire in the fireplace, careful to use only dry wood that would produce minimal smoke. "You must be hungry," he said, pulling some jerky, hardtack, and dried apples from his saddlebags. "It's not much, but it'll keep you going." Kit accepted the food gratefully, only now realizing how famished she was. They ate in silence for a while, the crackling fire the only sound in the small cabin. "Those men," Tucker finally said, his voice low. "They'll keep searching." Kit set down her half-eaten jerky. "I know." "Mind telling me why they're so determined to catch you?" Kit hesitated, studying his face for any sign of deception. His features were weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held a steadiness that made her want to trust him, against all her better instincts. "I'm accused of murder," she said finally. Tucker's expression didn't change. "Did you do it?" "Yes." Kit lifted her chin defiantly. "I shot Jasper Blackwell dead, and I'd do it again." To her surprise, Tucker merely nodded. "Thaddeus Blackwell's son, you know of him. Cattle baron with more money than morals. His reach extends through most of the territory." Tucker took a sip from his flask before offering it to Kit. "What his son do to deserve killing?" Kit took a long swallow, the whiskey burning a path to her stomach. "I worked at the Golden Nugget in Virginia City. Jasper was a regular who couldn't take no for an answer. 3 nights ago, he cornered me after my shift, dragged me behind the saloon. Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened around the flask. He would have done worse, but I had a Derringer in my pocket. He didn't expect that. Tucker reclaimed the flask, his face impassive. And his father sent bounty hunters instead of the law. The sheriff in Virginia City is in Blackwell's pocket. The wanted poster claims I robbed Jasper and shot him in cold blood. No one who saw what really happened is brave enough to contradict Blackwell's version. Kit laughed bitterly. $500 for the woman who murdered his precious boy. Where were you headed, Helena? I have a cousin there who might help me get further north into Canada. Tucker nodded thoughtfully. Helena's a good choice, big enough to disappear in for a while. You know the area. I run cattle on a small spread about 30 miles south of there. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. He poked at the fire with a stick. Those hunters will likely circle back to the creek by morning, try to pick up your trail again. Kit felt despair wash over her. They won't stop, will they? Not if Blackwell's paying them enough. Tucker considered her for a long moment. Get some rest. I'll take first watch, wake you in a few hours. Kit wanted to protest, but exhaustion was claiming her rapidly. She moved to the narrow bed, hesitating only briefly before lying down fully clothed, her revolver within easy reach. Within moments, she was asleep. Tucker remained by the fire, listening to the night sounds outside. He'd recognized the men following her, the Rutledge brothers and Carson Pike, notorious for bringing in bounties by any means necessary. That they were working for Blackwell wasn't surprising. The cattle baron's influence extended throughout the territory, and his reputation for ruthlessness was well earned. What Tucker hadn't told Kit was that he had his own history with Thaddeus Blackwell, one that had cost him his family's ranch years before. The thought of helping someone who'd struck a blow against the Blackwells, justified or not, held a certain appeal. As the night deepened, Tucker kept his vigil, occasionally stepping outside to check the horses and scan the surrounding forest. Each time he returned, his gaze would linger on the sleeping woman, wondering what twist of fate had brought their paths together on this particular evening. Kit awoke to the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, reaching for her gun. "Morning," Tucker said from his position by the small fire. "Made some coffee." Kit relaxed slightly, pushing her tangled hair from her face. "What time is it?" "Just past dawn." He handed her a tin cup of steaming black coffee. "Thought we'd let your mare rest a bit longer before heading out." Kit sipped the strong brew gratefully. "You stayed up all night." Tucker shrugged. "Used to it. Army habits die hard." They shared a simple breakfast of more jerky and the last of the dried apples. As they ate, Tucker laid out a rough map on the table, sketching the terrain with a piece of charcoal. "We're here," he said, marking an X. "Helena's about 2 days' ride, but the direct route takes you across open country." His finger traced a line. "The Rutledge brothers know this territory. They'll have split up by now to cover more ground." "The Rutledges?" Kit asked sharply. "2 of your hunters, brothers Silas and Ezra. The third is Carson Pike. They're experienced trackers, not the kind to give up easily." Tucker's expression was grim. "Especially Pike." Kit studied the map. "So what do you suggest? We head north through the mountains instead?" He traced a different route. "It's rougher going, but easier to hide our trail. Adds maybe half a day to the journey, but better than running into Pike's rifle." Kit looked up at him, her green eyes searching. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. This isn't your fight." Tucker was quiet for a moment. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to be on the wrong side of Thaddeus Blackwell's temper." Before Kit could ask more questions, Tucker rose and began gathering their few belongings. "We should move." The longer we stay in one place, the more likely they'll find this cabin. They set out as the sun climbed higher, Tucker leading them through dense forest where the ground was carpeted with pine needles that muffled their horses' hoofbeats. Whisper seemed recovered after her night's rest, moving with renewed energy. Tucker's buckskin, a steady gelding named Scout, picked his way carefully along the narrow game trails. Throughout the morning, Tucker would occasionally stop, listening intently before changing direction slightly. Around midday, he drew up sharply, motioning for Kit to halt. "Riders," he whispered, pointing toward a valley below where two men on horseback could be seen moving slowly, examining the ground. "Silas and Ezra." Kit felt her heart rate quicken. "Can they see us?" "No, we're well hidden up here." Tucker watched the men for several minutes. "They're still trying to find where your trail disappeared. That buys us some time." They continued on, keeping to the higher ground. Tucker proved to be a skilled guide, always aware of their surroundings, often dismounting to check for signs of pursuit. By late afternoon, they had put considerable distance between themselves and the Rutledge brothers, but the terrain had grown increasingly difficult. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Tucker suddenly raised his hand in warning. Ahead of them, a massive tree had fallen across the path, blocking their route completely. The surrounding brush was too thick to go around. "We'll have to backtrack," Tucker said, frowning. "There's another trail about a mile back that a rifle shot cracked through the air, sending splinters flying from the tree trunk inches from Tucker's head." Both horses reared in alarm as Tucker grabbed Kit's reins and yanked both animals off the trail into the dense underbrush. "Down!" he shouted, pulling Kit from her saddle as another shot rang out. They tumbled to the ground behind a fallen log, the horses dancing nervously nearby. "Pike," Tucker muttered, drawing his Winchester, "must have circled around ahead of us. How did he know we'd come this way?" Kit asked, her voice shaking. "He didn't, just got lucky." Tucker peered carefully over the log. "He's got the high ground on that ridge, about 200 yards. A third shot struck nearby, showering them with dirt and debris." Tucker returned fire, aiming for the flash of movement he'd spotted among the rocks. "Can you get to the horses?" he asked, reloading quickly. Kit glanced at where the animals had moved further into the trees. "I think so. When I start firing, make a run for them. Get them ready to move." Tucker shifted position. "I'll lay down cover, then follow you." Kit nodded, crouching ready to spring. Tucker took a deep breath, then rose enough to fire 3 rapid shots toward the ridge. Kit immediately dashed for the horses, keeping low. She reached them without drawing fire, quickly gathering the reins and calming the nervous animals. Tucker continued exchanging shots with Pike for another minute before scrambling backward toward Kit and the horses. A bullet kicked up dirt at his heels as he reached cover. "That was too close," he gasped, swinging into his saddle. "Let's move." They plunged deeper into the forest, forcing their horses through brush and around trees, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Pike. Eventually, they reached a small clearing beside a tumbling mountain stream where Tucker finally called a halt. "Need to rest the horses," he said, dismounting stiffly. "And check for pursuit." Kit slid from Whisper's back, her legs trembling from tension and exertion. "Do you think we lost him?" "For now." Tucker unsaddled Scout, running a hand over the gelding's sweaty neck. "Pike's good, but even he can't track us through that mess we just came through without taking time." As Kit removed Whisper's saddle, she noticed a dark stain on Tucker's left sleeve. "You're hit." Tucker glanced down as if surprised. "Caught a piece of me. It's not bad." Kit moved closer, gently examining the wound. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow. "Let me help you with that." Using water from the stream and strips torn from her petticoat, Kit cleaned and bandaged Tucker's arm. His stoic expression barely changed, even when she knew her ministrations must have caused him pain. "Why did you come back for me?" she asked quietly as she tied off the bandage. "You could have kept riding when Pike started shooting." Tucker's blue eyes met hers. "Never been one to leave folks behind, especially not to men like Pike." Something in his tone made Kit wonder again about his history with the Blackwells, but before she could ask, Tucker was back on his feet, checking their surroundings. "We need to keep moving," he said, replacing his hat. "There's a mining camp about 10 miles north of here. We can get supplies and maybe throw the hunters off our trail." They rode more cautiously now, Tucker's wound occasionally seeping blood through the makeshift bandage. The landscape gradually changed as they descended from the higher elevations, the dense forest giving way to rolling hills dotted with aspens and pines. By early evening, they spotted smoke from chimneys rising in the distance. The mining camp of Prosperity Creek was nestled in a narrow valley, a collection of rough wooden buildings strung along a muddy main street. Several wagons were parked outside the largest structure, which appeared to be a combination general store and saloon. Tucker pulled Scout to a halt on a rise overlooking the settlement. "We'll need a story," he said. "Two strangers riding in together will draw attention." Kit nodded in agreement. Husband and wife, probably simplest, heading to Helena to visit family. Tucker adjusted his bandana to better cover his wounded arm. "Let me do most of the talking. Prosperity Creek is small enough that news travels fast, but independent enough that most folks mind their own business." They rode into town as dusk was falling, drawing curious glances from miners returning from their claims. Tucker led the way to the general store, helping Kit dismount with a deliberate display of husbandly concern that wasn't entirely feigned. His hand lingered on her waist, perhaps a moment longer than necessary. The store was busy with miners purchasing supplies, and a few women examining fabric and household goods. A pot-bellied stove in the corner provided warmth, around which several men were gathered drinking whiskey from a shared bottle. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, looked up as they entered. "Evening, folks," he called. "What can I do for you?" Tucker approached the counter, keeping his voice friendly but unremarkable. "Need some supplies. Heading to Helena to visit my wife's sister. Had some trouble on the trail, ran into a fallen tree, took a tumble." The shopkeeper nodded sympathetically. "Roads ain't been cleared proper since the spring rains. What supplies you needing?" As Tucker listed off basic provisions, Kit wandered the store, picking up a few small items to maintain their cover. She was examining a display of canned goods when she overheard a conversation from the men by the stove. "Bounty hunters came through this morning," one was saying. "Looking for some woman killed a man down Virginia City way." Kit froze, pretending to read a label while straining to hear more. "Rutledge Brothers, wasn't it?" Another voice confirmed. "Said she was headed north, $500 for information leading to her capture." "That's more than most of us see in 6 months," a third man commented. "What's she look like again?" Kit's heart pounded as she carefully replaced the can on the shelf. Glancing toward Tucker, she caught his eye, giving a slight nod toward the men by the stove. His expression didn't change, but he subtly positioned himself to better hear the conversation. "Red hair, green eyes, riding a gray horse," the first miner was saying. "Traveling alone far as they know." "Why's she worth so much?" someone asked. "Shot some rich man's son, Blackwell, I think the name was." There was a low whistle. "Thaddeus Blackwell, no wonder the price is high. Heard he owns half the territory." Kit moved back toward Tucker, keeping her hat pulled low. He was completing their purchase, thanking the shopkeeper with easy cordiality that betrayed none of his awareness of the danger. "Need a place to stay?" the shopkeeper asked. "Widow Hargrove rents rooms across the way." Tucker shook his head. "Appreciate it, but we're hoping to make a few more miles before full dark. Is there a safe trail north from here?" The man provided directions, and Tucker gathered their purchases, guiding Kit outside with a protective hand on her back. Once they were out of earshot, he murmured, "We need to leave immediately. The Ruttledges were here asking questions this morning." They mounted quickly, riding out of town at an unhurried pace that wouldn't attract attention. Only when they were well beyond the settlement did Tucker increase their speed, pushing northwest rather than directly north. "They know I'm headed to Helena," Kit said as they rode. "That's where they'll be watching." Tucker nodded grimly. "Which means we need a different plan. I have a friend with a small ranch about 20 miles from here, Jacob Fuller. He's trustworthy and no friend of the Blackwells. We can rest there, figure out next steps." Night had fallen by the time they reached the Fuller Ranch, a modest spread with a sturdy main house and several outbuildings. Lamplight glowed from the windows as Tucker rode into the yard and called out a greeting. The door opened, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with a graying beard. He held a shotgun casually in one hand, which he lowered upon recognizing Tucker. "Dawson, that really you?" The man stepped off his porch. "Been nearly a year since you passed this way." "Hello, Jacob." Tucker dismounted, shaking the older man's hand firmly. "Sorry to arrive unannounced. We're in a bit of trouble and need a place to lay low." Fuller's eyes shifted to Kit, taking in her trail-worn appearance and the exhaustion evident in her posture. "Any friend of Tucker's is welcome here," he said simply. "Come inside, both of you. My Ellie just put supper on." The house was warm and smelled of fresh bread and stew. Ellie Fuller, a stout woman with kind eyes, took one look at their bedraggled state and immediately began fussing over them, setting places at the table and insisting they eat before explaining anything. Only after the meal, when they were settled with coffee in the Fullers' comfortable sitting room, did Tucker explain their situation, telling Jacob about Kit's circumstances and the bounty hunters on their trail. Jacob listened without interruption, occasionally exchanging glances with his wife. When Tucker finished, the older man nodded thoughtfully. "Blackwell's reach is long," he said, "but not everyone bows to his money or his threats." He looked at Kit directly. "You'll be safe here for as long as you need, Miss Daniels." "We can't impose," Kit began, but Ellie cut her off. "Nonsense. This house has plenty of room, and Lord knows I could use another woman's company out here." She patted Kit's hand. "Tucker saved our boy during the war, carried him 15 miles with a bullet in his leg to find a field hospital. We owe him more than we can repay." Kit glanced at Tucker in surprise. He hadn't mentioned this part of his history with the Fullers. "It was a long time ago," Tucker said quietly. "Not so long we've forgotten," Jacob replied firmly. "Now you both look dead on your feet. Ellie will show you to rooms upstairs." Despite her exhaustion, Kit found sleep elusive that night. The Fullers' generosity had touched her deeply, reminding her that not everyone in the world was like Jasper Blackwell or his father. Her thoughts kept returning to Tucker, the mysterious cowboy who had risked his life to help a stranger, who had a history with the Blackwells he wouldn't discuss, and whose steady presence had become oddly comforting in the space of just 2 days. The next morning, Kit woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. She dressed quickly in clothes Ellie had loaned her, a simple skirt and blouse that were slightly too large but clean and whole. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Tucker and Jacob already at the table, deep in conversation that stopped when she entered. "Good morning," Ellie said cheerfully. "Sit and eat while these two finish plotting." Kit accepted a plate heaped with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. What are you plotting exactly? Tucker and Jacob exchanged a look before Tucker spoke. We've been discussing options. The Rutledges and Pike will keep searching, and eventually they might hear about the Fuller Ranch. Jacob nodded. Travelers pass through here regular. Can't guarantee someone won't mention seeing strangers. So we can't stay, Kit concluded, feeling a pang of disappointment. The Fuller Ranch had felt safe, however briefly. Not long term, Tucker agreed, but we need time to plan. Jacob's son Marcus is riding to Helena today to make inquiries, see if the hunters are watching the town, maybe find your cousin. Kit pushed her food around her plate. And what if they are watching Helena? What then? Then we find another way, Tucker said firmly. Canada's still an option, just means taking a different route. Kit looked up at him. You've done more than enough already, Tucker. I can't ask you to keep risking your life. Tucker's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. You're not asking, I'm offering. Before Kit could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Jacob moved to the window, then relaxed. It's just Marcus returning, he said. Earlier than expected. They all moved to the porch as a young man in his 20s dismounted from a lathered horse. Marcus Fuller had his father's height and build with his mother's gentler features. He nodded a greeting to Tucker before addressing his father. Riders coming, Pa, 6 of them, about an hour behind me. Jacob's expression hardened. Blackwell's men, Marcus shook his head. Don't think so. They're wearing badges. Deputies from Helena, looks like. Kit felt her stomach drop. The law, but how would they? Blackwell, Tucker said grimly. He must have convinced the territorial marshal to send deputies, makes the hunt official. Jacob turned to Kit and Tucker. You two need to go. Now, take the back trail through the north pasture. It'll lead you to Elkhorn Creek. Follow that west into the mountains. Jacob, I won't bring trouble to your family, Tucker protested. Your family too, Tucker, and sometimes family needs protecting. Jacob clasped Tucker's shoulder firmly. Besides, they got no cause to search my property without a warrant, and I'm not inclined to make it easy for them. Ellie had already disappeared into the house, returning moments later with a bundle. Food for the trail, she said, pressing it into Kit's hands. And a change of clothes for each of you. The next minutes passed in a blur as they hastily gathered supplies, saddled their horses, and prepared to flee once more. Before mounting, Kit impulsively embraced Ellie. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. The older woman hugged her tightly. You be careful, girl, and you take care of our Tucker. They rode out the back way, staying close to tree lines and ravines that would conceal their passage. Tucker led them northwest, deeper into increasingly rugged country. By midday, they had reached Elkhorn Creek, a swift-running stream cutting through a narrow valley flanked by steep, forested slopes. We'll follow this for a few miles, Tucker said, then head up into those hills. There's an old hunting cabin I know of, not comfortable but well hidden. Kit studied his profile as they rode. Why are you really doing this, Tucker? And don't tell me it's just because you dislike bounty hunters. Tucker was silent for so long Kit thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. 8 years ago, I came back from the war to find my family's ranch in Blackwell's hands. My father had borrowed money to keep things going while I was away. When he couldn't pay, Blackwell foreclosed. My father died a month later. Heart gave out, they said, but it was really a broken spirit. He paused, his jaw tightening. I tried to fight it legally, discovered the loan documents had been altered after signing, but Blackwell owned the judge too. I ended up with nothing but the clothes on my back and a price on my head when I confronted Blackwell in public. So you understand, Kit said softly. I understand what it means to lose everything because of one man's greed. Tucker's eyes met hers briefly. And I know what it's like to be hunted. They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The creek narrowed as they continued upstream, the terrain growing steeper and more challenging. By late afternoon, Tucker guided them away from the water and up a barely visible trail that wound through dense pines. The hunting cabin was little more than a crude shelter, 4 walls of rough-hewn logs with a dirt floor and a stone fireplace. But it was well concealed in a small clearing, surrounded by thick forest and rocky outcroppings that would make it nearly impossible to spot from a distance. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Tucker said as they unsaddled the horses. Kit smiled wearily. "It's perfect." They settled in as evening approached, Tucker building a small fire in the fireplace while Kit organized their supplies. The cabin was cold and drafty, but the fire slowly warmed the small space. They shared a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and dried fruit from Ellie's provisions. "How long do you think we can stay here?" Kit asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the chill. Tucker fed another stick to the fire. "A few days at most. We need to let things calm down, give the deputies time to move on. And then what? Then we reassess. Maybe try for Helena again or head straight for the Canadian border." Tucker leaned back against the wall, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "Blackwell can't keep this many men in the field forever. Even his pockets have limits." Kit studied the flames, absently twisting a strand of her auburn hair. "I never thought I'd be running for my life over Jasper Blackwell. He wasn't worth it. Men like him rarely are." Tucker's voice held a note of bitterness. Kit looked up at him. "What will you do after? After I'm safely away? Go back to your ranch?" Tucker was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about selling, actually, starting fresh somewhere else. Because of the Blackwells, partly. And partly because there's not much holding me there anymore." He poked at the fire. "One man on a small spread can only do so much." The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence. Kit found herself studying Tucker's face in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way the firelight brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair. She realized with a start that in different circumstances, in a different life, she might have found him handsome in a way that mattered. As if sensing her scrutiny, Tucker looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers across the fire. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or something deeper that neither was ready to name. The moment was broken by a sound outside, the snap of a branch that sent them both to their feet, reaching for weapons. Tucker moved swiftly to the window, peering cautiously through a crack in the shutters. "Can't see anything," he whispered. "Might have been an animal." Kit joined him at the window, her revolver ready, or might not have been. They waited, tense and alert, but no further sounds disturbed the night. Eventually, Tucker relaxed slightly. "I'll take first watch," he said. "Try to get some sleep." Despite her exhaustion, Kit found it difficult to rest, acutely aware of Tucker's presence as he kept vigil by the window. The small cabin seemed to grow smaller as the night deepened, and the air between them charged with an unspoken tension. When she finally drifted off, her sleep was troubled by dreams of pursuit, running endlessly through dark forests with unseen hunters at her heels. She woke with a start to find early morning light filtering through the shutters and Tucker asleep sitting up against the wall, his rifle across his lap. Kit moved quietly, adding wood to the dying embers and setting water to heat for coffee. The domestic task felt oddly normal in their extraordinary circumstances. As she worked, she found herself wondering what it would be like to wake up to ordinary days in an ordinary cabin with a man like Tucker Dawson. The thought startled her. She'd never been one for such fantasies, especially about men. Her experiences at the Golden Nugget had taught her caution and distrust. Yet something about Tucker's steady presence and unwavering support had begun to chip away at her carefully constructed defenses. Tucker stirred, instantly alert in the way of a man accustomed to danger. His eyes found hers, and a small smile softened his features. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "You should have woken me." Kit handed him a cup of coffee. "You needed the rest." They spent the day in relative peace, venturing out only to check on the horses and gather more firewood. Tucker examined their surroundings carefully for any sign they'd been discovered, but found nothing concerning. By evening, they'd settled into a companionable routine, sharing stories of their lives before the events that had thrown them together. Kit told him about growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a school teacher who had died of influenza when Kit was 16. How she'd made her way west, working in boarding houses and saloons, determined to be independent in a world that offered few options for women alone. Tucker spoke of his childhood on the ranch south of Helena, his 3 years fighting with the Union Army, and his dreams of rebuilding what Blackwell had taken from him. As they talked, the space between them seemed to shrink, filled with growing understanding and something that felt dangerously like attraction. On the 3rd day at the cabin, Tucker announced they needed to hunt if they wanted fresh meat. Kit insisted on accompanying him, unwilling to be left alone. They set out in the early morning, moving silently through the forest with Tucker's rifle and Kit's revolver at the ready. After an hour of careful stalking, Tucker spotted a young deer in a small clearing. He raised his rifle, then hesitated, glancing at Kit beside him. She nodded her understanding and approval. The shot echoed through the trees, and the deer dropped instantly as they approached the fallen animal. Tucker handed Kit his hunting knife. "Ever dressed game before?" Kit took the knife with determination. "No, but I'm willing to learn." Tucker showed her how to field dress the deer, his hands guiding hers through the process. Despite the bloody work, Kit found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his breath on her neck as he leaned close to demonstrate a cut. They were nearly finished when Tucker suddenly stiffened, his head turning sharply toward the trees behind them. Kit followed his gaze but saw nothing. "What is it?" she whispered. "Not sure," he murmured back. "Thought I heard something." They quickly finished their task, wrapping the meat in the deerskin to carry back to the cabin. Tucker insisted they take a circuitous route, doubling back several times to ensure they weren't being followed. By the time they reached the cabin, Kit was convinced his concern had been unnecessary until they stepped into the clearing and saw fresh hoofprints in the soft earth near their shelter. Tucker immediately pushed Kit behind him, drawing his revolver as he approached the cabin cautiously. The door stood slightly ajar, though Kit was certain they had closed it firmly upon leaving. With his boot, Tucker nudged it open fully, his gun raised and ready. The cabin appeared empty, but someone had clearly been inside. Their few belongings had been disturbed, and a piece of paper lay on the rough table, a wanted poster with Kit's face crudely sketched beneath the word murder in bold letters. "Pike," Tucker said grimly, examining the poster. "This is his style, leaving messages, playing games." Kit felt cold fear wash over her. "He knows we're here." "He knows someone's here," Tucker corrected. "The poster could be a guess, or he might have recognized our horse's tracks." He quickly gathered their scattered belongings. "Either way, we need to leave. Now." They packed hastily, abandoning the deer meat they'd so carefully prepared. As they led the horses from the lean-to, Tucker kept scanning the surrounding forest, his expression tense. "Where will we go?" Kit asked as they mounted. "There's only one place left I can think of," Tucker replied. "My ranch. It's the last place they'd expect us to go." They rode hard for the remainder of the day, taking a challenging route through steep mountain passes and dense forest that would be difficult to follow. Tucker set a pace that pushed their horses to their limits, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest the animals. As dusk approached, they crested a hill overlooking a small valley. Below, a modest ranch spread out before them, a main house, barn, corral, and several smaller outbuildings nestled against the backdrop of pine-covered mountains. "Dawson Ranch," Tucker said quietly. "What's left of it, anyway?" They approached cautiously, Tucker leading them on a roundabout path that utilized the cover of trees. When they reached the barn, he dismounted and signaled for Kit to wait while he checked the house. She watched anxiously as he moved silently across the yard, rifle ready, disappearing into the darkened structure. Long minutes passed before Tucker reappeared in the doorway, waving her forward. Kit led both horses to the barn, where Tucker helped her unsaddle them and provide water and feed. "House is clear," he said. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here in weeks." The house was simple but solid, 3 rooms with basic furniture that spoke of a life focused on practicality rather than comfort. A layer of dust covered most surfaces, evidence of Tucker's extended absence. "It's not much," he said, almost apologetically, as he lit lamps and started a fire in the stone hearth. Kit looked around, seeing not the dust or sparse furnishings, but the careful craftsmanship of the wooden table, the well-worn books on a small shelf, the handmade quilt folded at the foot of the bed in the corner room, touches that spoke of home and permanence. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. Tucker's expression softened. "It was my father's dream. He built most of it himself." He ran a hand along the mantelpiece. "After the war, I hoped to expand it, maybe add another room or 2. And then Blackwell happened," Kit finished for him. Tucker nodded, his jaw tightening. "The main house and 20 acres are all I managed to hold on to. The rest the best grazing land. The creek access, it's all Blackwell property now." They prepared a simple meal from their remaining provisions, and Tucker found a dusty bottle of whiskey in a cabinet. As they ate by lamplight, the events of the past days seemed to catch up with Kit all at once. The constant fear, the physical exertion, the emotional strain, it overwhelmed her suddenly, and to her horror she felt tears welling in her eyes. Tucker noticed immediately. "Kit, what's wrong?" She shook her head, trying to compose herself. "Nothing. Everything. I don't know how much longer I can keep running." Without a word, Tucker moved to sit beside her, his arm going around her shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and comforting. Kit found herself leaning into his strength, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. "You don't have to face this alone," Tucker said softly. Kit looked up at him, suddenly aware of their proximity, of the warmth of his body against hers, of the surprising gentleness in his eyes. Something shifted between them, an invisible barrier dissolving. "Tucker," she whispered, not entirely sure what she was asking for. He hesitated, searching her face. "Kit, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. They both froze, then Tucker was on his feet, extinguishing the lamps with swift efficiency. "Back door," he whispered urgently. "If it's Pike or the deputies, I'm not running any more," Kit said firmly, drawing her revolver. "Not without you." Tucker looked as though he wanted to argue, but another sound, voices outside, decided the matter. They moved to the windows, peering carefully through the curtains. 3 riders had entered the yard, but to Kit's surprise, they weren't deputies or bounty hunters. One was a woman in a practical riding dress, another an older man Kit recognized as Jacob Fuller. The third was a young man in a city suit. Tucker relaxed visibly. "It's Jacob, and that's Marcus with him." He squinted. "Don't know the woman." He opened the door, stepping onto the porch. "Jacob." "What brings you here?" The older man dismounted quickly. "Tucker, thank God you're safe. We've been riding all day trying to find you." Tucker asked, his eyes on the unknown woman. Jacob gestured to her as she dismounted. "This is Abigail Reynolds, Miss Daniels' cousin from Helena." Kit rushed forward in shock. "Abby," the woman turned, her face breaking into a relieved smile. "Katherine, oh, thank heavens." The cousins embraced tightly while Jacob explained to Tucker. "Marcus went to Helena as planned, found Miss Reynolds working at the territorial office." When he mentioned Katherine's situation, she insisted on coming with us. Abigail released Kit, her expression serious. "Katherine, there's something you need to know. The charges against you, they've been dropped." Kit stared in disbelief. "What? How is that possible?" "A witness came forward," Abigail explained. "Mary Colton, one of the girls from the Golden Nugget. She testified that she saw Jasper attack you, that you shot him in self-defense." "Mary," Kit whispered, "but she was terrified of Blackwell." "Why would she?" "Because Thaddeus Blackwell is dead," Marcus interjected. "Found in his study 3 days ago, heart failure, they're saying." Tucker's expression showed his shock. "Blackwell's dead? You're certain?" Jacob nodded grimly. "As a doornail." "His son Ellie's taken over the business, and apparently he's not as interested in pursuing his brother's killer. Especially after Mary's testimony made it clear what kind of man Jasper really was." Kit felt lightheaded with the sudden reversal of fortune. "So the bounty hunters have been recalled," Abigail confirmed. "The territorial marshal issued the order yesterday. It's over, Katherine. You're free." The full impact of the news took time to sink in. They moved inside, where Jacob produced a bottle of good bourbon from his saddlebag to celebrate. As they talked into the night, the details emerged: how Mary had found the courage to speak up after Blackwell's death, how Ellie Blackwell had chosen to distance himself from his brother's actions to preserve the family reputation, how the territorial marshal had been surprisingly quick to accept the self-defense explanation once Thaddeus's influence was removed. Through it all, Kit found herself watching Tucker, trying to gauge his reaction. He participated in the conversation, asked appropriate questions, but something in his manner seemed reserved, almost distant. When Jacob, Marcus, and Abigail finally departed for the night, riding to town with plans to return in the morning, Kit and Tucker were left alone in the sudden quiet of the house. For the first time since meeting, an awkward tension hung between them. "So," Tucker said finally, "it appears your troubles are over." Kit nodded slowly. "It appears so. Your cousin seems eager to have you come to Helena. She mentioned something about a position at the territorial office." "Yes," Kit confirmed. "She's been trying to get me to join her there for years." Tucker busied himself banking the fire, his back to her. "It's a good opportunity. Helena's growing fast, plenty of chances for a fresh start." Kit moved closer to him. "And what about you? What will you do now?" Tucker straightened, finally meeting her eyes. "Continue as I have been, I suppose. Run what's left of my cattle. Maybe with Thaddeus gone, I can petition to get some of my land back." "Is that what you want?" Kit asked softly. Tucker's expression became unreadable. "What I want." He trailed off, then tried again. "Kit, you have a chance at a normal life now, a respectable job, family nearby. You deserve that after everything you've been through." "That doesn't answer my question." Tucker ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "What do you want me to say?" "That in the space of a week, I've come to care for you more than I thought possible. That the idea of you riding away tomorrow makes me feel like I'm losing something I never really had." The raw honesty in his voice made Kit's heart race. She stepped closer, until they were merely inches apart. "And if I said I felt the same?" Tucker's eyes searched hers, hope warring with caution. "Kit, I have nothing to offer you but a struggling ranch and a man who spent too long alone." "You offered me your protection when I needed it most," Kit countered. "Your courage when mine was faltering." You're home when I had nowhere else to go." She placed her hand against his cheek. "Those seem like worthy offerings to me." For a moment, Tucker remained still, and Kit feared she had misread the situation entirely. Then his arms were around her, pulling her against him as his mouth found hers in a kiss that spoke of longing, relief, and something that felt remarkably like coming home. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just tonight. Stay with me, Kit. We can rebuild together." Kit smiled, feeling truly safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. "I was hoping you'd ask." The following spring found the Dawson ranch transformed. The main house boasted a new addition, a bright kitchen with large windows that caught the morning sun. The corral held twice as many horses as before, including Whisper, who had found a permanent home. The barn was repaired, the fences mended, and a small garden flourished beside the house where Kit tended vegetables and herbs. With Thaddeus Blackwell gone, Tucker had indeed managed to reclaim some of his father's land. Ellie Blackwell, more interested in Eastern investments than territorial disputes, had been surprisingly amenable to selling back the property at a fair price, particularly after learning of his father's questionable acquisition methods. Kit's cousin Abigail visited regularly from Helena, bringing news and supplies. Jacob and Ellie Fuller had become dear friends and occasional partners in cattle ventures. Even Mary Colton had stopped by once, on her way to California with her new husband, a shopkeeper from Virginia City. Life wasn't always easy. The Montana Territory remained a challenging place to make a living, with harsh winters and unpredictable markets. But together, Kit and Tucker faced each obstacle with the same determination that had brought them through their first desperate days together. On a warm evening in June, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, Tucker took Kit's hand in his, running his thumb over the simple gold band she now wore. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Kit leaned against his shoulder, her free hand resting on her slightly rounded belly where their first child grew. "Only that we wasted so much time being hunted when we could have been building this." Tucker smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Not wasted. Without the hunt, we might never have found each other." Kit thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment: a desperate flight, a cowboy who erased her tracks, and the courage to stop running and make a stand. Sometimes the path forward meant facing what was behind you. "I love you, Tucker Dawson," she said simply. "And I love you, Katherine Dawson," he replied, his arm tightening around her as they watched the day's last light fade over the land that was finally, truly their own.